This episode of Brains on Games is about a superhero battling game with dice. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald, and this episode we're going to preview a game that just delivered on Kickstarter. It's still available for pre-order, but this is a superhero battling game involving lots of die rolls, and it is a game from Roxley called Marvel Dice Throne. This is a gigantic box. It's probably very shiny on the camera, but Marvel Dice Throne is a game for kids aged 8 and up. You can play it with 2 to 4 players. In a 4-player game, you're playing 2 teams of 2, and a game plays in about 20 to 40 minutes, so it's super quick. Let's take a deeper look at Marvel Dice Throne. This just came in the mail to me just last week, so I've only played with some of the characters. We haven't even played with all of them, and it was very funny. Just before it delivered, my son came to me and said, "Dad, I've seen all these videos about this Dice Throne game. I'm really interested in it. Can we get season 1 of Dice Throne?" And I said, well, the Marvel one is supposed to come later on. So it was serendipity that everything came together. He was excited to play Dice Throne, and it just delivered like right after he said that. Now, you could see that everything's very organized in the box. I really like this box organizer. It makes the game super quick to set up. And you may be able to see if I flip this, hopefully, everything's sliding around. Hang on here. You can see where the heroes are supposed to go. So everything's super organized and easy to track down. If you can't see that, I'll try and find a graphic that will show what all of that looks like. But it's a game that's light to medium in complexity. Of course, you're playing different Marvel superheroes, so all of the players have unique powers. Your goal here in this game is to reduce your opponent's health counter to 0. And if you're playing against a team, each team has a shared health counter. So you're really only working on one dial that you're trying to bring down to 0. Inside these little boxes, each superhero has a separate box. You will find your player board. This is where you're going to be playing cards, and it keeps track of your abilities. You've got a card that has some information about the dice that are in here and the different faces on them. Also, it's got information about your powers and what each token does. Here's something that I really like about Dice Throne is that when you flip this card over, they've got frequently asked questions about how these powers work. So it just explains the rules and makes that a little bit easier. It has a list of all the components that are supposed to be in the box so you can make sure you haven't lost anything. And it gives you an idea about how complex the character is to play. So this is a light to medium game. Some of the characters are more complicated than others, and they have a little die face with numbers on it to show, a 4 or 5 is going to be much more complex than a number 2. Of course, Spider-Man's my favorite superhero, so he was the one that I wanted to play with, and he's not as complex, so it was great for our first games to play an easier character like Miles Morales. Beneath those cards, you've got your deck of cards, you've got your custom dice for each hero. There's a couple of dials to keep track of your health and how many combat points you have to spend. You play cards by spending combat points in the game, and you've got all the tokens and counters that you're going to need to play that hero. So everyone is going to have their own board like this and their own hero dials, unless you're playing on a team, and then you've got one team health dial. You've got all your tokens and counters, and of course all of those are going to be different. Miles Morales can turn himself invisible, or he can web up his opponent. The first game that we played, and I will say this is first impressions. Again, I haven't played with every single character. The game just came in. So the first game that we played, and the one that I remember the best because it really made an impression on me, was Miles Morales versus Black Panther. My son played Black Panther, and of course I was Spider-Man because he is my very favorite superhero. So you're rolling dice, and it's a lot like a Yahtzee style game where depending on whether you get a large straight or a small straight or 4 of a kind, you're going to activate different powers on the board in order to damage your opponent or to activate some ability. Now, these cards, you've got this whole deck of cards, and that mitigates the randomness somewhat. Sometimes the cards will allow you to change a die face or even change an opponent's die face to force them to roll again, to allow yourself to get an extra roll, to change the number on the die to a number that you like better. So there are lots of ways to mitigate the randomness of the dice, but there is still randomness because you are rolling dice, and dice are usually not my friend in these kinds of games. The other kinds of cards that you have in your deck, in addition to things that can mess with players' roles, you can add tokens. Some of the cards will allow you to take a token off your board and play it onto your player board here so that you can use it later on. Spider-Man's invisibility token allows him to avoid attacks more easily or to reduce damage from attacks. You can also upgrade some of these abilities. So there are cards in the deck where you'll spend some of these combat points in order to replace a power here to increase the damage or make it easier for that power to activate. You've got unique player boards, you've got upgradable player powers, and then you've got these die rolls that are mitigated by card plays. There's some take that cards in the deck, which were very helpful. There's one that Spider-Man uses that allows him to attack a second time. This combo attack will allow him to attack twice, and sometimes he can cut the damage from an attack in half, or he can deal damage in return when someone attacks him. At the beginning of your turn, you're going to add a combat point to your combat point dial. Like I said, there's a cost to those cards often that you're going to play. So you spend combat points to do that. You draw another card into your hand, and then you decide, are you going to play some cards to upgrade some things here? Are you going to attack the other player? And when you do finally decide to go on the attack, you'll roll these 5 dice. You're going to roll those dice 3 times, and then hopefully you'll be able to activate one of these attack abilities here on your player board. For example, if you roll 2 of these Spider-Man hands and 2 of the red spiders, you're going to do 5 damage to your opponent, and you're going to get one of these combo counters that will allow you at some point when you spend it to do an extra attack. That's how this game works. So it's kind of a back and forth. When I attack my opponent, very often they're going to be able to defend against that attack. So there are some attacks, if you manage to get a really good combo, you can do undefendable damage where they don't get to activate their defense power. But often your opponent is going to be rolling dice as well to respond to whatever your attack is. And like I said, with Black Panther, he was doing damage to me up to 3. I think up to 3 damage he was able to do, maybe 4 even, whenever I attacked him. So I would hit him and he would do 1 or 2 damage to me in return. And we went back and forth like that. Now, what skills are you exercising when you're playing a game like Dice Throne? I mean, a lot of it is just randomness where you're just rolling dice, and sometimes you can mitigate that with your cards. Well, there is a hand management element to this game where you're budgeting those combat points to spend the cards that are in your hand. You can also, I didn't mention this earlier, you can also discard. There's some points in the turn where you can discard cards from your hand in order to earn 1 combat point for each card that you discard. So you're doing that hand management, and you're really kind of budgeting your combat points in order to spend those points on these cards. And when you're budgeting, that is an example of an executive functioning skill. So many of these games that have any kind of strategy involve those executive functions because you're planning ahead, you're working towards a goal, and maybe you're trying to tackle that goal efficiently or in some sort of an organized way. Now, again, you're rolling dice and they're random, but you also, when you're playing games like Dice Throne, games like Yahtzee, even games like Taco Ninja Adventure, you're rolling those dice and it is random, but that knowledge of probability is something that you're practicing too. So that one little piece of math is something that you're working on. Are you going to try and get 5 6s on your dice in order to activate that ultimate ability? Well, what are the odds that that's going to happen? Maybe it would be easier to activate one of the other abilities on this side because, like I said, there's 1 red spider face on this die. There are 2 of the white webs, and then there are 3 of those little blue Spider-Man hands. So it's much easier to get those spider hands than it is to get the red spiders. And that's true of all of the characters in the game. There's 1 face that's going to be the hardest one to get, and that's the one that's going to activate your ultimate ability. So final thoughts about Marvel Dice Throne. Well, really first impressions about Marvel Dice Throne, because like I said, I haven't tried all the different combinations of characters. Certainly we enjoyed playing, well, any game with Spider-Man in it is something that I'm going to want to play. So we enjoyed playing the characters that we did play, but let's say that these are first impressions. You've got great box art. You saw the box at the beginning when I of the video when I picked that thing up. You've got the great art on the box, and the style of the characters is almost like a manga style in terms of the artwork. You may not be able to tell that as much with Spider-Man here, but when you look at the picture of Scarlet Witch, for example, or Loki, they are a very sort of Japanese influenced style of art, and I really enjoyed that. The box is super organized too. You saw when I opened that thing up, you've got your 8 character boxes. Everything is organized in those game trays, and they all slot into a certain place. There's a place for the rules in the middle of the box, so it's perfect. It's super fast to set up and super fast to tear down. Now, you saw that I have a mat here on the table, but that's not even needed. It just makes it easier when you're trying to pick up cards off the table, of course, to have some sort of a neoprene mat underneath. And again, Spider-Man artwork. I don't want to have one of those things on my game shelf. And then you've got that gameplay that's super fun. Each of the characters plays totally differently. I mean, there are some shared cards from one deck to the other, like change a die face or turn your die to a number 6, things like that. But of course, only Spider-Man is going to have a swing escape that activates his spider senses. So there are lots of unique cards in the deck as well. And the characters that we've played so far did feel different as you're playing them. I mean, you've got Spider-Man who's avoiding damage with his spider senses and turning invisible. You've got Black Panther who is just, sort of exploding with that kinetic energy that's causing damage to the other characters. So it felt different. You would use a slightly different strategy depending on which character you're playing. And I haven't even played them all. So I'm looking forward, like I said, to tearing this out and playing it again. And because it is so quick to set up, that's going to be very, very easy for me to do. I've never heard anyone online say a negative thing about the Dice Throne games, and the Marvel Dice Throne is just another one in that package. I'm hoping that it's going to be compatible with what I think is a campaign game, that Dice Throne Adventures, and then we can have superheroes adventuring as well. If there's a downside to Marvel Dice Throne, and like I said, I've never heard anyone say anything negative about Dice Throne, but if there's a downside, it's that maybe your favorite superhero isn't in this box. So there's 8 heroes in the box, but if Iron Man or Captain America are your favorite, I mean, the first comic book I can ever remember reading was a Peter Parker Spider-Man comic, Peter Parker versus Shocker, and so, I would have loved to have seen the Peter Parker Spider-Man, but of course Miles is the modern incarnation maybe of that character, so I did still get to play with him. There's not too many villains in that box. I mean, you've got Loki, who's now kind of becoming an anti-hero if you watch that series on TV, but maybe Green Goblin would be, then you can have, a hero versus their preferred villain. That would be great to have arch enemies facing against each other, but that's not an option yet. I mean, there's lots of opportunities to expand. There's already 2 seasons of the regular Dice Throne boxes, so there's 2 big battle chests like this one with other characters that's more like maybe a D&D style fantasy role-playing game. But this one has the Marvel heroes, and of course, that is a theme that I absolutely adore. So this is a game that's going to hit the table often. It's going to be pulled out alongside Unmatched, I think, when my son's friends come to visit. Those are the 2 games that they're really excited to play. And now we've got some superheroes that they can roll dice in order to represent those powers. So once again, Roxley has knocked it out of the park with a beautiful, wonderful, fun, quick, easy game to play that still has some strategy, even though you're rolling dice randomly. If you have any questions, if you have any suggestions, you can leave them in the comment section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.